Hello and welcome to the Wheel of Crime podcast. This podcast is ran by two ladies who play games, mumble profanities, and laugh way too often. Also, this podcast does cover topics of sensitive nature, and as such, listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to the Wheel of Crime podcast. My name is Jen.
And my name is Emily. Yes, welcome back, everybody. It has been a journey. This entire podcast has been a journey, and yet we find ourselves here today yet again. And?
Yes,
Jen.
On the long walk of life, you have arrived here
With us
at
today.
our podcast.
Yeah. And, Jen, how has your last week been?
It's been so hectic. I was telling Emily that I was a real adult this week, and I actually called about a problem that I've been meaning to call and figure out for like 6 years. So clearly you can tell where my mental state was for the last 6 years, that I couldn't just make a simple phone call.
Yep, which is also relatable because here's the thing about those specific adult things. Do they need to be done? Yes. Do you think about them and think about how they need to be done? Also, yes. Do they feel eminent enough where you're like, I need to call about it today? No. So then it just never ends up happening.
Well, it was specifically a thing with my car, and anyone who knows me knows that I get mad anxious about my car. So that's something that I don't want to fucking deal with. That's someone else's business, not mine.
Yeah.
So
who's gonna
if
call
I can
about
put it
this
off,
car
I will.
that I own? Who's doing that?
Yeah, like that's not my problem.
Honestly, that's fair though. I was going to tell you about something before the episode, but I'm just going to tell you about it now because I've also been taking care of some things this week. Honestly, I was so busy that my life would be simpler if I wasn't busy doing these things, but some of these things just had to be done. And one of those things that I had to do this week was go get my eyes checked because...
Oh, no.
As Jenn is aware, because she's done this herself, and my family, and other people I know, people keep pointing out that I'm squinting at things. And I was like, you know what? It's probably time. So I went in, got my eyes looked at, and my guy, my eye guy, you know, the eye guy, the
optometrist.
Yeah, that guy. He was like, so, how long has this been happening? And I was like, oh, well, I mean, people just started mentioning it within the last year for sure, like 6 months, but I can't say I've noticed anything like super crazy going on. And as he was asking me to read things, I was like, oh, This is feeling like a problem. So, you want to hear the diagnosis, Jen, on what my problems are right now?
Yeah, lay it on me.
I need full-time glasses. And I need full-time glasses because my left eye is nearsighted and has astigmatism. And my right eye is farsighted. And then I have my old lady problem where I see those black specks in my eyes, the protein thing or whatever it's called. In my left eye, and it's actually a part of the condition where it gets bigger as years go on. So he's like, yeah, you're going to be coming back in 2 weeks for a full-time pair of glasses. For a full-time pair of glasses. And I was like, yeah, that checks out. It's time. It's time.
Fun.
Yeah, I just did not realize it was that bad. And then he was, having me read stuff, and I was like, I can see! Because I kind of thought for a little bit that my body was just being kind of dramatic. Or I was like, nah, it's good. My eyes are just tired. You know how they do that? They just get tired, and then I can't read.
You know what's hilarious? I went in for an eye exam like 2 years ago with the exact opposite problem, where like my eyes were just tired and things were like slightly less sharp than they usually are. And I think they gave me like a pity prescription of like literally like 0.1 off, like full vision. So he's like, yeah, you could get a prescription for like 0.1 and make things like a hair sharper for you, but you definitely don't need to wear these all the time. And I was like, I knew something was wrong. I knew it. I knew it was a little
I felt it in my
blurry.
bones. I felt it. I knew it. Okay, that's...
It's like literally the least prescription that they can give someone is what I have.
I love that for you. That's really funny, though. Yeah, because... And I look... Yeah, like you just said, I had the opposite issue where I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure my eyes are just tired. But people keep mentioning that, and he's like, oh, no, girl, you need, like, full-time glasses. Like, this is a problem.
You're fucking blind, bitch.
Well, like, and he's like, what did he tell me? He's like, operationally speaking, you can survive without glasses. He's like, for quality of life reasons, I'm gonna recommend that you wear them more often than not. And I was like,
nice.
Okay, sounds good.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, sir.
Lucky me. Yeah, so I did find that out yesterday. So that's cool. And now I'm gonna get a swanky new pair of glasses here in a couple of weeks, and I'm gonna evolve into my new form because I also have a bob. I have a French bob now, and then I'm gonna have glasses.
You're just gonna be a hot French girl.
I know. I'm gonna be so mysterious. You don't even know it yet.
We need to get you a job in a library.
Ooh, I'd love a job at a library, and I'd make horrible recommendations on purpose. It'd be great.
Love that for you.
Me too.
All right. But let's get into our wheel of questions, because we got a good story today. This is one I've been, like, wanting to tell for a while.
Cool. I'm in. Let's do it.
Did you go to school with anyone who is famous now?
Yeah, you.
Oh, cute. I'm not famous.
Let me think about that. We went to school together, obviously, but, like, we know that. But for any new listeners, so Jenn and I grew up together. And as far as, like, famous people we've gone to school with, I honestly know, all I know is that a couple of them are influencers. One of them is, like, really big on TikTok or something. And that's pretty much it. I don't think we have any, like, actual famous people we went to school with.
I feel like we know, I think there's, like, two that we know that, like, actually made it onto Broadway, but, like, not in a famous way. Like, they were just, like,
yeah,
like, part of the chorus or whatever, which is still impressive.
Oh,
but
totally, yeah.
I mean, I feel like we know people who are locally famous for going to, like, jail and stuff. Does that
I think that's less famous and more of a notoriety, but I'll accept
infamous,
that.
maybe?
Yeah, infamy, I think. Yeah, we do know a couple of those. More, actually, than I think actual famous people.
Yeah.
Oh, it brings me joy. Love it.
All right, let's move for our next one.
Okay.
Have you ever read the book or watched the movie The Lovely Bones?
I've heard of it because I know it's very sad. And I feel like I've seen enough clips between Facebook and, like, other social media platforms. Like, I know how it ends. Like, there's some weird pervert neighbor who like, hurrah, like a child, and then locks her in a freezer, and then her like body rolls into the ditch, and then her spirit is in heaven, and she's like, oh no, they'll never find my lovely bones. I don't know what I'm talking about, by the way.
I mean, sorta, I guess. It's
is
more,
that the right
there's
movie,
like,
though?
yeah, so there's a young girl who gets a camera for her, like, 13th birthday, and I am only going off of the movie because I haven't read the book, so
yes.
This might be very different. So she gets a camera for her, like, 13th birthday and immediately blows through, like, all of the canisters of film, and it's quite expensive to develop film, still, even.
Mm-hmm.
But, so her dad's like, oh, okay, or her parents are like, we'll do one a month is what you can develop. And so she's like, ugh, fuck you guys. So she's like, there's this neighbor that she has, and he basically lures her into this cornfield by telling her that there's this cool clubhouse that he's built for all the neighborhood kids, and she gets down there and she's like, the vibe's off. Yeah. And then she tries to leave, but he murders her. And then it's like her ghost, like, trying to, like, basically seeing her family, like, find out she's dead, and then trying to figure out who killed her. Mm-hmm. And then her I can't remember if it's her older or younger sister, basically figures out it's the neighbor and like it sneaks into his house, and then he like catches her, and she like has to jump out a window, and there's a big chase, and then finally she's able to report him to the police.
Oh, ha ha. See, all I know is that when the book came out, I remember a lot of people reading it and crying a lot, because it would have been when we were in school, like pretty young, I think.
Yeah, like middle school.
Yeah, and like I said, I've only seen clips of the movie, and the only thing I know off the top of my head from that movie for sure is like the slow-mo of this like refrigerator or something that her body's in, like rolling down a hill, and then her spirit like goes to the afterlife or something, and then everybody cries. And that's all I know. Or they don't find her body or something. There's like something really sad about that. Or like she's in a sinkhole or something.
Yeah, he like puts her I don't know if it's a refrigerator, but he puts her body in something after he kills her in the cornfield, and then like buries her so she won't be found, essentially.
Yeah, alright. That's more or less what I pictured.
Yeah.
I knew somebody died.
There you go.
But I feel like the only other thing I know is that this author, I think she wrote like another book series or something that people have talked about and they thought it was weird. But that's all I know about The Lovely Bones.
Fair.
Your smile is a little... Huh, alright. Is that the key? Do we spin for our next question?
Yeah, let's move to our next question.
Okay.
Would you ever write a book?
Would I ever write a book? I'd like to think so one day. I'd at least like to give it a shot.
I think you would be so good at it.
My thing is just, I have a hard time with finding the patience to string the ideas together in a way that makes sense. Like, I like the mapping out of things, and I like creating plot. It's more, sometimes I feel like the way that I write things, it just gets very tedious feeling sometimes. But I guess nowadays you can do like voice to text and then go over it afterwards and then make it sound nice and whatever. But I don't know. I'd like to, like I said, I'd like to give it a shot one day. I like to think I could be creative that way.
Everyone leave this podcast a 1-star review if you think Emily should write a book.
No, we're going to have like 5 million 1 stars. We're going to flunk on all of our platforms. That's fine, guys, actually, at this point. Feel free if you want to do it.
Join the club.
Yeah, join the club. Yeah, Jen gave our own podcast a 1-star review.
Yeah, I'm just like making fake accounts, giving it a 1 star.
Yeah.
Fucking quit already, bitches. No one wants to hear you talk anymore.
This podcast has been around since 2019. Get off the internet.
It's time for it to end.
Yeah. Well, what about you? Would you write a book?
For sure. I really enjoy writing, and I used to write a lot more. I think it's hard, weirdly enough, like going to university and getting... Because I went to journalism school, so I feel like it's a very different style of writing. And I found ever since, like, I finished that program, obviously, I found it really hard to go back to narrative writing because I feel like my brain has just been rewired to this different type of writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't written nearly as much as I used to, but I would love to like find my way back to like the creative writing space.
Yeah, I feel like the creative writing space is something where it's it feels like one of those things where once you're engaging in it a little bit more, then it becomes more natural and you have those inclinations to actually do them. You know what I think you should write? Smut.
What?
A smut book.
A
smut book. Because Ice Planet Barbarians is a huge thing. You could be... What would you write? I don't know. I'm trying to think about like what kind of smut book I think you would write.
See, I feel like I used to be really into writing like mysteries. I feel like that was more my forte.
Yeah, that would be very on brand for you. It would be more on brand for me to write a smut book.
Yeah.
No, I'd love to read a mystery book of yours if you wrote it. I think that'd be really fun.
Okay, let's both write a book and then trade.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do it. All right, do we spin for our last question?
Spin away, girlfriend.
All right, what is the last question?
Would you describe yourself as an introvert or an extrovert?
I myself think I'm a little bit of both because I'm social enough that I don't feel awkward. in extroverted situations, or like situations that an extrovert would fry. Set me free. Would, what word am I searching for? Thrive, not fry. An extrovert would thrive. I feel comfortable enough in those situations, it's not weird for me. But I feel like I do a lot of recovering as a person on my own. Like, I really enjoy my solo hobbies. And I do like spending time alone. But if you were to ask my husband, he would say confidently that I am an extrovert. So I don't know what that says about any of this. It probably means that I'm an extrovert.
I feel like it is a sliding scale, right? Like, I don't think you're necessarily one or the other. I feel like maybe your husband's just more closer to like the end of the scale that's like fully introvert, you know? Whereas you're like a little bit more in the middle.
I would agree. I think too, if you're different enough from somebody you spend a lot of time with, like say in the situation of an extrovert versus introvert, it kind of feels like you sense more of those differences. But I think you're right too on it being a scale, and I think that people probably feel certain levels of extroversion versus introversion. And yeah, sure, there might just be people who are like fully extroverted or fully introverted, but I don't know. I feel like you and I were kind of similar in that way. You just lean a little bit more introverted.
I feel like I lean a little bit more introverted than you, and you lean a little bit more extroverted than me. But I don't feel like I'm like so far to like the introverted side. Like, I have a little bit of extrovert in me. I just like, I feel like as I've gotten older, I've gotten more introverted because I have less patience for people who I don't care about.
See, I feel the opposite. I feel like I've become more introverted or more extroverted as I've gotten older, because I've just gotten to a point where I don't give a fuck about what people think or say anymore. I'm like, I'm here to have fun and be the person that I want to be, and if you've got a problem with that, that's your own problem. Like, I do not care what you think or what you have to say.
I just feel like I'm like, I just like, I don't know. I feel like I'm really comfortable with silence, and I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable to be silent. So like they think I'm very introverted, whereas I'm like, I'm just cool to like sit here and vibe. Like, I don't feel the need to fill the space with small talk. Whereas I think a lot of people do, and it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would say I'm comfortable with silence too. Like, there's been a lot of times growing up where you and I would just hang out, and it would be like, hey Jen, hey Emily, you want to watch a movie?
And we just sit in silence and look at our phones
for like a few hours, and it was great.
I know, right? Like, I don't know.
But now I see you and I can't stop talking because it's so long between when I see you. I'm like, no, I can't waste a single moment. But no, there was something about that specifically that I was going to add on. But now I can't remember. I feel like maybe in your case is just too, like, it's like a little bit of being comfortable in silence, but maybe also like a little bit of like the not giving a fuck just in your own way.
Yeah. I think I'm also just like self-editing myself in my head, which is probably a bad thing.
That is a bad habit.
But I'm just like, why would I, like, in my head, I'm like, I could say this, but then I'm like, but why would I say that? That doesn't add any value to this conversation. If I just say that, I'm just like, you know, saying something to say something, and I'm having this whole fucking dialogue in my head, and they're just sitting there like, oh my god, will this bitch respond or not?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't self-edit quite like that. I do have minutes where if it's like a sensitive topic, I'll self-edit and be like, okay, like, what do I actually want to say here? Or, oh, okay, like, is how I'm perceived of any importance currently?
I feel like you're actually the only person I don't self-edit with, and so by proxy, this podcast, I don't self-edit nearly as much. So sometimes when I'm editing it, because I am the person who edits this podcast,
you are editing
yourself my god,
physically. Yeah,
I'm like so annoying. I'm the most annoying person that's ever lived. Why did I say that?
Oh, you're lovely. I love listening to you talk.
I love listening to you talk too, bestie.
Thanks. Yeah, I wish I could remember what the other thing I was going to say. Something to do with introversion, the being comfortable with silence. Yeah, it was here, and then it was gone. Probably not important.
Whoosh.
Basically. The week.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. Do you have any guesses as to what my story is about today?
Well, you did give me a weird little smile after I mentioned some other book that this author's written. So I'm going to assume that it's the author of The Lovely Bones' other book that's weird or something.
Kind of.
Okay.
So, it does have to do with the author of The Lovely Bones and a book that she wrote. So,
Okay.
the one that she wrote actually before The Lovely Bones. So, let's get right on into it.
All right.
So, we're obviously going to talk about Alice Sebold, who was born on September 6, 1963 in Madison, Wisconsin. She grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, where her father taught Spanish at the University of Pennsylvania. And while they were young, Alice and her older sister Mary often had to take care of their mother, a journalist for a local paper who suffered from panic attacks and drank heavily. Alice graduated from Great Valley High School in Malvern, Pennsylvania in 1980, and after high school she went on to attend Syracuse University, where she earned her bachelor's degree. So, on May 8th, 1981, 18-year-old Alice, who was a university freshman at Syracuse, was celebrating the last day of school, the school year at her friend's apartment. So, after the festivities were over, she left to head back to her dorm, following the brick path through Thornden Park. She said a man had grabbed her from behind, punched her, threatened to kill her with a knife, dragged her by her hair, and then raped her in what she described as a tunnel. Her face was bruised, and she had a bump on the back of her head and a cut on the left side of her nose. Abrasions covered her body, and dirt covered her hair and clothes. Traces of blood and semen were found inside her vagina, as well as on her underwear. Alice said her rapist was a stranger to her, but during the attack, she studied his appearance. She described him as small but with a muscular build, and she recalled that he gestured his eyes and his lips. 5 months later, on October 5th, 1981, she spotted a man named Anthony Broadwater near a restaurant in Marshall Street, and Alice immediately thought she recognized him as the man who had assaulted her. At the time, Anthony was talking to a police officer he knew. Alice stated that Anthony called over to her, "Hey girl, don't I know you from somewhere?"
Well, that's horrifying.
Right? Like, I can't even imagine being in that situation where you're like, I think that's the guy who assaulted me, and you're like looking at him, and
yeah,
then
and you're trying
like,
to figure it
"Hey."
out, and then he looks at you and he's like, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" I'd be shitting my pants. Are you kidding me?
I'd be like, please help me. I need to arrest someone.
Get me out of here. Yeah, that's freaky.
Before we continue, let's just take a moment to talk about Anthony, because him and Alice have like very different upbringings, like different things going on in their lives. And I think it's just interesting to see like kind of the contrast between the two. Mm-hmm. So he was born in Syracuse, New York, and was the fourth of 6 boys. His father worked at Syracuse University as a janitor, so I think it's interesting. His dad worked at a university as a janitor. Alice's dad worked at a university as a professor. You know, like
right.
Just like very different like levels already of like, you know, it's just interesting that it worked out that way. So Anthony rarely set foot on campus, saying that he felt it was off limits to him and other young black locals. Instead, he spent time at a community rec center and the local Boys and Girls Club. When he was about 5 years old, his mother died of pneumonia. Anthony and his brother Wade were the ones who discovered their mom's body on the couch in their living room, which would be so hard as a kid. Mm-hmm. So, while he was growing up, Anthony was known as outgoing and rambunctious, often tussling with his siblings. Wade recalled how his brother could get caught up in entertaining a crowd, and he was once stopped for letting kids ride on the roof of his car. While the police who patrolled the neighborhood were familiar with the brothers, Anthony had never been accused of anything serious. Anthony had attended Henninger High School, and he was a skilled wrestler on his school team. However, he dropped out around 17 and was intrigued when a Marine Corps recruiter said he could be on a flight to California within days. He said, quote, "I wanted to see the world and try to better myself." Anthony decided to serve in the U.S. Marine Corps and ended up stationed at 29 Palms and Camp Pendleton. His career ended up being short-lived, and he was discharged after receiving a cyst on his wrist. He returned to Syracuse, where his father was ill with stomach cancer, and eventually took a job installing phones for a telecommunications company. So, back to October 5th, 1981, Anthony and one of his friends drove over to Marshall Street. While his friend was inside a store, Anthony recognized a police officer from his youth, and the two started catching up. As we know, it was at this point that Alice spotted him and was watching his exchange with the cop. He too remembers calling out to her, "Hey, do I know you?" So, days later, Anthony was taken into custody because Alice had gone to the police and identified him as her rapist. The police put Anthony and 4 other men into a lineup and asked Alice to identify her assailant. Alice initially identified number 5 as her attacker. However, Anthony was actually number 4 in the row. An hour later, Alice insisted that the 2 men had looked identical to her and that it was actually number 4, Anthony. Which is very racist, I gotta say. So we don't love that.
I feel like, too, if your first impression is somebody else entirely, you shouldn't be able to go back and change it afterwards and then be like, no, it's because they look the same. It's like, no, you identified
the wrong person.
Yeah, the person who looked more similar to you or whatever to your attacker. Like, you can't just go back and be like, no, I changed my mind.
It's this other one, for sure.
Yeah.
So, the trial began on May 17th, 1982, and just lasted 2 days. Alice took the stand, and when asked if she had any doubt that Anthony was her rapist, she responded, "No doubt whatsoever." Alice testified that, quote, "I could not have identified him as the man who raped me unless he was the man who raped me." Which is hilarious when she misidentified him. However,
yeah,
we'll just move past that. We'll just pretend like we believe her there. Okay? We're just going to move on.
Okay, gotcha. So she openly misidentified this man, and then on the stand, B's like, "I would know him anywhere." Which, okay, I will say, though, I can understand, like, if we're taking both sides into consideration, like, the mind is weird. Like, I know, like, sometimes it does weird things to you afterwards. Maybe you misremember some details, or, like, you mix
especially a traumatic event.
Yeah, especially traumatic events, and especially ones that happened a while ago, too, is the other thing. So she might fully believe this, but I have my own doubts on this man actually being the man who attacked her. Not to say that she wasn't. I just don't think it was this guy.
So, DNA analysis was unavailable at the time, but a forensic chemist testified that a pubic hair from a black person had been recovered from the rape kit and was consistent with the hair sample that Anthony had submitted. Hair comparison has since been discredited by the FBI as an unreliable source that can match a little beyond a person's race and is responsible for many wrongful convictions. Anthony was the last to take the stand, and he was the only witness to testify for his own defense. His lawyer had asked him to discuss his unique facial markings, which were features that Alice had never reported seeing. He said, quote, "I have a scar underneath my chin, and I had an operation in 1974 on my eye. Also, I have a chipped tooth." In his closing argument, the prosecutor reminded the court that Alice had been a virgin, a detail brought up more than once throughout the case. Afterward, the defense was startled when Judge Gorman immediately announced he was ready to rule. He declared simply and with no insight into his decision that Anthony was guilty of rape in the first degree.
What?
Which is fucking crazy.
It's crazy it even got to this point in the first place. Things should have ended when she couldn't identify her attacker. That's it. That's it. Like, that's the end.
I know. So at just 20 years old, Anthony was convicted based on Alice's identification and microscopic hair analysis. He was charged with 8 felony counts, including rape and sodomy. Anthony was sentenced to between 8 1/3 years to 25 years in prison. He was immediately taken into custody, departing from a courtroom devoid of any friends or family members. He had not asked anyone to attend the trial, certain that he would walk free. He was empathetic throughout that they had got the wrong guy, said Anthony's defense attorney Stephen Paquette. It was a disbelief coupled with faith that once the facts were out, justice would be done for him. Alice, on the other hand, said that she felt confident justice had been served. While in prison, Anthony obtained his GED and studied the law, trying repeatedly to get his case revisited. At one point, he hoped to retain Johnny Cochran, sending $1,000 saved from his disability payments and custodial job, but the lawyer's firm returned the money, informing him it did not handle post-conviction matters. Anthony's dad, who believed in his innocence, wanted to help but was undergoing chemotherapy and died in 1983. At each parole hearing, Anthony refused to admit guilt, despite knowing he would fare better if he expressed responsibility for the crime. In 1999, Alice went on to write a memoir entitled Lucky about her own rape, in which she had changed the name of her attacker to Gregory Madison. The book followed her entire journey throughout the criminal justice system. In one scene, she recounted how a prosecutor she trusted named Gail told her that the man she identified in the lineup was a friend of Anthony and had tricked her by staring menacingly. Which is just fucking nuts to say.
That can't
to
be
someone.
Real, right? Like, that's crazy.
It is crazy.
That guy was here to trick you on purpose because he's a friend of the perp. What?
Right? So according to the book, Gail then coached her into explaining away the misidentification in front of a grand jury. Alice also described being given a short break while testifying, during which she received a visit from the judge, who warmingly asked about her family. His tone was more gentle than the one he used in court, Alice wrote. In retrospect, these passages would help illustrate the flaws in Anthony's case, but it was little too late. This personal account of her trauma served as inspiration for many sexual assault victims. Alice then went on to write a novel titled The Lovely Bones about a 14-year-old girl who's raped and murdered. Published in 2002, it reached the top of the New York Times bestseller list, selling more than 10 million copies before eventually being adapted into a film. Anthony, however, served 16 years before being released on the last day of 1998, but his life continued to be heavily affected by the conviction, as he was required to register as a sex offender, which severely limited his job prospects and social interactions. He relied on temporary gigs, taking a job at a metal plating factory, bagging potatoes, doing yard work, roofing, mopping floors, scavenging for scrap metal. He liked taking night jobs because they gave him the alibi he had lacked when the police questioned him about Alice. Which is so incredibly sad.
That's really sad.
He had been home at the time but had no proof. So Anthony's computer use had to be monitored after he was released, so he found it easier to just never learn how to use one. Despite this, Anthony tried 5 times to have the conviction overturned with at least as many groups of lawyers. One disappeared with $1,400. Another failed to obtain his file, which had been sealed. When a car accident had left Anthony with a neck injury, he set aside most of the $30,000 payout, hoping he could find a lawyer to take his case. A year after his release, he began dating a woman named Elizabeth. She was a Baptist like him, had a sincere way about her, and she was a homebody. He wasted no time handing her a file with the information about his past. If you're going to be in a relationship with me, this is what I'm going to be fighting all my life, he said. She pored over the papers in tears. I don't know how they did this to you, she said. I'm going to be with you. They moved into a dilapidated house his father had left behind. She wanted kids, but Anthony felt it would be unfair to bring kids into this difficult world. He learned of Alice's memoir around 2006, but he had no interest in reading what he considered his own horror story, which I think is very fair. Yeah. So Timothy McCante was a disbarred lawyer from Michigan who had gone to prison multiple times for fraud. His most wild scheme was one in which he convinced investors that he would buy condoms and latex gloves and trade them in Russia for chickens, and that would be sold in Saudi Arabia. But he pocketed the money instead of doing that because it's crazy.
Duh. What?
So after his last prison stint ended in 2010, Timothy hoped to reform himself. And I can speak to this from personal experience. So in an interview, he had said, I certainly have a lot to make up for in terms of what I owe the world. And his journey of self-improvement, Timothy decided to start a new career as a filmmaker, which honestly checks out for half the filmmakers I know and half the people I know working in the industry. Like, they're a bunch of actual wackadoos. So this really is not shocking to me, but
Gotcha. Okay. So just in case anybody was curious, filmmakers are usually people who try to trade condoms for chickens, and then when that doesn't work out and they end up getting
they just steal,
fined or whatever, they just steal a bunch of things and become a filmmaker.
Exactly. After going to jail, and trying to reform their life.
That's a very important part.
Yeah, exactly. So he started his own production company and joined other producers who were adapting Alice's memoir and planning to film it in Toronto. He offered to cover the film's entire budget of 6.5 million Canadian dollars. As Timothy read the script and the book, he was struck by how little evidence was presented at trial. He said he began to doubt the memoir's veracity and withheld funding until he was dismissed from the project, which never ended up getting off the ground.
Well,
in late June, Timothy decided to take a deeper look at Alice's trial. He found and hired Dan Myers, a retired detective who had spent 20 years with the Onondaga County Sheriff's Office and was working as a private investigator. Dan said that a police officer who worked on the case had offered him a stunning admission. He did not believe the right man had been caught. Dan connected Anthony with David Hammond, a criminal defense lawyer he worked with, who had served as a judge advocate in the Army. Intrigued by Anthony's case, David reached out to Melissa Schwartz, a lawyer at a different firm known for her forensic expertise, and the two teamed up separately, combed through Anthony's files. After talking at length with Anthony and reading Alice's memoir, the lawyers discovered the arguments they could make for exoneration were obvious. The flawed hair comparison testimony, the heavy reliance on Alice spotting her rapist 5 months afterward, the misidentification during the police lineup, the fact that Anthony had passed 2 polygraph tests. David said 40 years, yet all it took was someone to pick up the trial transcript and frankly talk to Anthony and read Lucky. Shortly after, David and Melissa also convinced William Fitzpatrick, the Onondaga County District Attorney, to join Anthony's legal team and help overturn his conviction. On November 22nd, 2021, at the age of 61, the judge finally granted Anthony an exoneration. Alice said she had learned a few weeks before Anthony's exoneration that the district attorney was reevaluating the case. She said, "It's hard to unravel a truth I now know to be false that has been a part of my life for 40 years and my work for 20. Without my whole understanding of the truth and justice falling apart, every word I've read that Anthony Broadwater has said has made me see him as a man, though brutalized, somehow came through it with a generous heart. To go from thinking he was the man who raped me to believing he was an innocent victim is an earth-shattering change. In a separate interview, Alice said that her, quote, goal in 1982 was justice, not to perpetuate injustice, and that she was now wrestling with the realization that her rapist went free. She said that Anthony had become another young black man brutalized by our flawed legal system. I am sorry, most of all, for the fact that the life you could have led was unjustly robbed from you. In response to Alice's statements, Anthony said, that was very strong and courageous of her to do that. I know that was weighing on her mind. She went through an ordeal, and I went through one too. So afterwards, Anthony ended up with a settlement of $5.5 million from the state of New York for his wrongful conviction. Anthony has also filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Onondaga County, the city of Santa Cruz, and an assistant district attorney and a police officer who were involved in prosecuting him. That case is still pending. In a statement after receiving his settlement, Anthony said, I appreciate what Attorney General James has done, and I hope and pray that others in my situation can achieve the same measure of justice. We all suffer from destroyed lives.
Well, I will say that he is truly the biggest person out there, because that's just so heartbreaking to experience that and then still be kind at the end of the day and try to be understanding when you've lost 40 years of your life because of this.
For something you literally didn't do.
Yeah, and not to mention, I will say this because I feel like what she said only made me madder. She is offloading her own responsibility and her own guilt from this situation onto the system when she herself, in her own memoir, points out the flaws and that she knew what she was doing was wrong and she did it anyways.
Yep.
That's fucked up. And, I would love to know who this person was, because clearly if it's a memoir, each one of her characters, even though they're being given false names and maybe some of the details are being exaggerated, what have you, clearly she had somebody on the back end there who, like you said earlier with the whole lineup thing, like that line in her book, Lucky, where it's like, oh, and then I had the coach, he was coaching me, and he let me know that in the lineup, the guy was like a friend. It's like, so who was this person on her legal team who was pushing her through? Because there's no way they don't know that, right?
It was one of the prosecutors.
Okay, see? And it's like, okay, so they literally, and it's like on one hand, yes, absolutely the system, because I feel like when you have racist people or people in general who have biases in systems like this, it just opens the door for people to take advantage of people, which is clearly what happened here. Because not only did they take advantage of him, but they took advantage of her, too, a victim also. And then on top of that, I still don't love how she is trying to alleviate herself. I don't like how she doesn't quite address that majority of this responsibility does lie with her. But at the same time, I do feel like what really failed her is her team, and definitely in a big part the system.
I feel like I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Part of me is torn because you have to remember she was 19 years old.
Oh, I guess, yeah. I'm thinking
think
more,
about
I thought she was a little bit older.
The cognitive skills that you have at 19, they're not quite there.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as somebody who's a little bit older, you're right.
So she was raped at 18, so this is probably all happening when she was 18, 19 years old, maybe 20.
Yeah.
So part of me is for sure, a lot of the blame is on her. She clearly was able to reflect in her memoir that this was fucked up, and she didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, not to cut you off, but I feel like maybe a part of my frustration is the fact that at any point over the years, she could have said something and been like, hey, I don't feel comfortable with, a lot of what happened with this case because of how old I was at the time or whatever. If she herself called it into question, that probably would have weighed, wouldn't it?
It's hard to say, right? Like, the victim doesn't really, I mean, they have a say, but they don't really have a say. Like, they have influence over the verdict, but they don't decide the verdict, right? Like,
Yeah.
That's why you read a victim's statement at sentencing to kind of like sway the judge of like, this is what happened to me and like this is what I would like to see, but the judge doesn't have to do that. And also there's a whole group of like fully brain functioning adults in that room, like the judge, who took no time to decide that this guy was guilty because they kept bringing up that she was a virgin.
Yeah, and then also too, like now that you brought up the perspective of her being so young, I remember being 19, and sure, I feel like as far as like how smart a person is, I don't really feel like that really changes like your overall intelligence and stuff, but I think that when you are that age, and especially if you have gone through an experience that is traumatic, you tend to look for guidance. And she, I guess,
for sure,
with that perspective, maybe at the time, and not even upon reflection until way later, would she have even, like, thought that a lot of this stuff was, like...
I mean, think about when you were 19, and if, like, a prosecutor, someone who is, like, supposed to know what the fuck they're talking about in terms of the law, was telling you, oh, yeah, this guy was a friend of the guy who raped you, and he was trying to look menacingly at you, so you would pick him and you would be confused, and so that, you know, they could use it in the trial to say that you didn't know who raped you even though you identified him. You know, like, I can see the why she did this, and obviously she went through this traumatic thing and wanted the person who raped her to get caught, because I mean, I would want that too. It's just the way she went about it was very wrong.
Yeah. And it also, I think, makes me mad because the guy who did it is still out there. Like, like so many levels of, like, just, you know, she was wronged, he was wronged, and the person who is the asshole who is guilty of all of this never even got in trouble. Like, that is so aggravating.
That's, I think, the worst part of it all, is they went through all of this and the right person wasn't even caught. Like, he suffered and she suffered, and both of them don't get any resolution from this, really.
But, like, that's my thing too. And it's like, and literally for what? Because the people who are working within the system just wanted to expedite this because they wanted to feel good about something. Like, I don't even understand why half this stuff happened.
Well, that's the thing, is like, if you can't identify your rapist, I'm going to say in like the first month, it's probably not going to happen, because your brain literally forces itself to forget traumatic things.
Yeah. Or like I was saying earlier, like smaller details or stuff, or like as you recollect things, like your memories change over time. That's why they say like oral tradition stories, as they get passed down, usually change. And a lot of the times, like, you know, the story that you heard from like your grandpa about something that happened when he was younger versus like what he told your parent versus what your parent told you versus what he tells you, like, they're all going to be different. That's literally what happens.
Yeah. But yeah, I have had this one on my list for a while because I heard in like 2021 about this case like finally getting like some resolution, and I was like, ooh. And then I put it on a list and haven't looked at it until now.
Yep, that's what happens. I feel like next week I will probably be covering a similar story because I have a long list of things that I wish to talk about.
Yes. But yeah, that's all for my story today. Sorry, it was a sad one.
That's okay. We like to balance ourselves sometimes, I guess. So if you liked today's episode, make sure to leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to our podcast on. 5 stars is always appreciated. And then we also have our website, which is www.wheelofcrime.com if you want to check us out on there. We have our social media, which is on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Wheel of Crime. We have our Patreon if you'd like to donate to the show, which is Wheel of Crime at Patreon. We have our email, which is wheelofcrime@gmail.com. And lastly, as always, we have our listener story form open on all of our social media. Should you listen to one of our episodes and you're like, I read The Lovely Bones once, write in.
That's all, period.
I guess. And I don't know. There's nothing. Yeah, sure. If you did that, write in and tell us about it, I guess. I don't know. I got nothing else. But if you listen to any of our episodes and you do have a listener story and you wish to submit it, feel free at, like I said, on our social media, as we do listener stories fairly frequently throughout the year now for special occasions, and get your chance to listen to our show.
Yes, that's it. That's all. And we'll see you next week for another new episode. Okay, bye.
Bye.